Hello and welcome to Today in Film, episode 27. I'm your host, Dominic Parry, and with me today is
Kevin Parry.
Now, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about The Green Mile, released in 1999, starring Tom Hanks and Michael Clarke Duncan as the two kind of main characters. So, what do you think about this film?
I thought it was a very interesting and engaging film. It ran to 3 hours, but to be fair, as you were watching it, you didn't get the impression that it was sort of dragging on. It was a very interesting watch and one that I would recommend.
Well, I think to do with the runtime, especially the kind of 3 hour mark for a lot of films is like it's one that they don't go to because of how tedious it can feel to watch some of them. But this, even though this has some kind of down to earth scenes, it doesn't kind of bore you with them.
No, any of the scenes where there is a repetition, it actually builds on the scene that had preceded it. So you get to learn more about the characters or more about the plot, and they don't just go over things for the second time just for the sake of it. It's something which is central to the plot.
Yeah, I think so. It kind of has a semi-rotating cast with you've got the guy. So you've got Edouard Delacroix and Wild Bill. Those are the two that kind of stick around the longest. And then you've
those
got
are both inmates.
yeah, and then no, but then
on
you've
the
got
mile.
Arlen Bitterbuck, who's the kind of first one to go.
Yeah,
And that kind of like obviously the prison guards stay the same throughout the entire thing, but the rotation of the cast in regards to the prisoners, it kind of keeps it fresh and keeps it moving.
and they introduce each character and inform you of the bits that they want to inform, but keep you guessing about some of the other aspects. So in some cases, why they're actually on death row, and in some cases that's explained in a bit more graphic detail. Why was the film called The Green Mile?
So, well, it's basically they call the mile like the bit between taking them from the cell to the electric chair, and because the floor is like faded lime color, they call it the Green Mile.
Yeah.
So that's it essentially. But yeah, I think the only two characters I think were told why they're there is Wild Bill and Corfy. So it is kind of a plot device when they kind of tell you because they don't want you to lose sympathy for characters because they've done horrific acts.
Yeah, yeah. The film starts with a bunch of local farmers and various other people hunting down a man in the woods and in the open fields, and then the reason for that and all the sort of detail of that then unfurls as the film goes on.
Well, I think that's it's obviously you're meant to go into this film. I'd assume you're meant to probably assume think that he might be guilty at the start. However, at no point did I think he was kind of the one who did it.
No.
Even though I've watched this twice now, and neither of the times did I think how are they going to show how this guy's guilty, because you just kind of assume, and it's played in such a way where you're meant to assume that the guy's guilty.
Yeah. So one of the main characters is Tom Hanks, who happens to be one of my favourite actors. I don't think I've seen a bad Tom Hanks film, and he plays it brilliantly. And the other main character is Michael Clarke Duncan, who's a made to look larger than life. He's a
hulking figure.
Yeah, massive and sort of towers over the other members of the plot. Stands at 6'5" in reality, but in the film, because of some of the shots and because of the way that it's played, apparently they made the bed shorter to make him taller when he was in bed. So he's 6'5" tall, and interestingly, James Cromwell who plays Hal Moores, who's the head warden, is actually an inch taller, but they never shot them sort of side by side. Michael Clarke Duncan looked like an absolutely massive and overbearing character, and body covered in scars, and had obviously led a very interesting and hard life.
Well, I think it's a kind of film that has some very mysterious parts to it. Obviously, it's Stephen King, an adaptation of it by Frank Darabont, who also did the Shawshank Redemption. And an interesting point about that is he gave the role of Paul Edgecombe in this to Tom Hanks because he had to take him out of Shawshank Redemption.
All right. So one of the early scenes in the film is of an aged gent in a nursing home, and he takes to going off for walks with a couple of pieces of dry toast in the mornings, and one of the staff there reveals that he's onto him, and he knows he's going off walking, and what is he doing? And the guy says, "Well, I'd just like to walk." And at that point, you think, well, there's perhaps a bit of escapism in that, and perhaps finds the sort of situation in a nursing home a little bit overbearing, and just wants to get out. But the truth of that then becomes revealed later on.
Well, I think one of the things I thought when you have the old Paul character, the actor they chose, Dabbs Greer, I'm not sure if he comes from the same state as Tom Hanks or whatever.
Yeah.
But the accent is extremely close and it just works.
Yeah.
So you can imagine this being an older version of Tom Hanks's character.
And very well cast, really, because he actually looks like an age version of Tom Hanks too, doesn't he?
What they did try to do initially was have Tom Hanks play the old guy, but they just thought that the makeup and stuff didn't look good enough. Which I feel like if they did it now, they'd probably use some kind of technology, and Tom Hanks would have played it. But I think it adds to the role when it's not the same actor.
Yeah. So the plot as it unfurls, then the opening scene is the chase through the farmland, and basically Hick Farmer's two daughters are taken, so they're disappeared, and all the sort of local farmers are rounded up, and farm hands, and they're out there with guns and pitchforks and what have you, chasing whoever it is down. And they eventually come across a few bits of cotton stuck to branches in the trees and stuff, so they know they're on the right trail. And then they eventually find coffee out in the middle of a stream or in the middle of a river with the two dead girls either side. He's obviously discovered them, but they then immediately assume that he's the guilty party.
Well, I think Michael Clarke Duncan, who got nominated for an Oscar for his performance, as well as a number of different awards for his performance, he's definitely, I'd say, kind of one of the draws to this movie because he plays the character so well.
Yeah. So what's his background then? Was he actually an actor? Was he formally trained, or?
Well, I know that he started out as a kind of security guard on film sets, and I can't remember who it was, but one of the famous rappers, when they got killed, he kind of packed it in and somehow got into acting just through connections.
Okay.
So he actually got this film because he was in Armageddon. Do you know that film?
Yeah.
So he was in that with, I think it's Bruce Willis, isn't it?
Mm.
So Bruce Willis basically passed his name on to Frank Darabont because they were struggling to find someone to play this, hulking, big black figure.
I don't think they could have found a better character, actually, a better actor to fill that role.
No, well, Shaquille O'Neal, the NBA player, was considered, and he's not a very good actor.
Right.
So it would have been. I think if he had been chosen, it would have been a completely different film.
Yeah.
Because it's his performance that kind of makes you believe this character.
Well, everything about him really. The facial expressions. You felt his pain. You felt his sort of his angst, and the shots just drew you into thinking there's more to this. There's more to the character, the guy, and there's a truth that needs to be told, and that's what sort of unfurled as the film went on.
Well, I think one of the things that is great about it is the fact that kind of when he's first introduced, they do the whole kind of the axle. It's down, it's pinned on the axle, so the weight on the back of the prison truck is immense. So they're kind of thinking, what the hell is this? And obviously, then he comes in and
the prison guards are looking out the window and they see the truck as it arrives, and it's down on its suspension.
But it's when he comes in and it's kind of this hulking figure, and you don't see his face until he kind of comes in through the door. But then one of the first things he says is about leaving the light on.
Yeah.
So
they're almost, because of their past experiences with inmates on death row, I suppose they're extremely wary.
Yeah.
And when they see the physical size of this guy, there's a bit of trepidation and nervousness, and they're very cautious, aren't they, in their handling of him?
Well, I think the whole point is that he's shown to be like a gentle giant, and obviously the only point in the film where he isn't a gentle giant is when he kind of strangles Percy, and then gives him the brain tumor. So like that's the only part where he's kind of violent towards somebody else, whereas all the other times he's very kind of polite and friendly.
But it was so cleverly done, wasn't it, in the build up to that it didn't even seem like a particularly violent scene. The character Percy deserved what he got, didn't he?
Yeah. Well, it's I think the whole point. So there's lines throughout the film. It's like when he's talking to the lawyer, I can't remember what his name is, but the guy who played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
When he's talking to him, and they're kind of saying, did he just appear out of nowhere? And all these strange kind of references. He's obviously not a very smart man as well, which I think probably gives obviously offers the idea that maybe this guy did just appear out of nowhere one day, and is just there to help people. So obviously he's suffering through trying to help these people, because no matter how much he does help, there's just more people to help.
Yeah.
And I just think, obviously at the end of the film, they draw on it kind of, does he deserve to die? And it becomes, he wants to die.
Yeah.
So
the burden has become too much.
Yeah.
So looking back at the character of Percy, we said that he deserved what he got. We first really see him when he's walking to coffee.
He's shouting, "Dead man walking!"
Chanting, "Dead man walking, dead man walking," causing a real stir, bringing the attention of all the other inmates. So we're looking out windows and seeing this going on. And he continues to do that down the corridors and sort of into the main building, to the amazement, really, of all the other guards who were looking on. Comes across as a thoroughly objectionable character, a real nasty piece of work. In one of the early scenes, he smashes one of the inmates' fingers with his baton.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's Delacroix's fingers.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, but it's because he had the bandage on his fingers the whole film.
Yeah.
But
So there's a French-American character called Delacroix,
who is
we don't get to know too much about him, but we assume that he's done an unspeakable act, really, to lead to him being there.
Well, that's the point of this film, how it's laid out. Like, Wild Bill is the only person, apart from John Coffey, he's the only one that they actually tell you what he did.
They flag it up before he comes and
Yeah.
prime you for what's about to happen, don't they? And then it's a very clever twist, because when Wild Bill actually comes in, they assume that he's been doped, because he's
Acting,
absolutely vacant. He's got sort of
drooling,
drooling out of his mouth, and he looks like he's been heavily sedated for the journey, and he carries on that act for until they get him down into the mile, and then all of a sudden breaks into a frenzy and sort of starts flailing out at the guards, and got pretty nasty pretty quickly, didn't it?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, I think one of the good things about Wild Bill is that he's played by Sam Rockwell, who's gone on to be a much bigger actor.
Yeah.
So this is a role that in other movies it would be a kind of bit part actor to come in to play this unknown face essentially. And also, and he plays this he plays an extremely quite annoying character, but you're not kind of taken out of the immersive feeling, because you just you look at it as the prison guards are.
Yeah.
So they're all getting a bit kind of annoyed at the guy, and you're sharing in that kind of feeling.
Well, it was just shocking, really, the way it went from zero to a sort of massive brawl, and punched the one guy in the face, and then was strangling the other, and all the while Percy, our thoroughly objectionable prison guard, was just standing there absolutely quaking, and took no part or did nothing to help to restrain him or anything. And then later it was revealed what had happened with Wild Bill, wasn't it?
Well, it was revealed that he was I'd assume a kind of farmhand on the family of the murdered daughters, and obviously by this point we already know about this kind of heavenly power that Coffey has, so we don't we're not looking at him as the suspect anymore. So when we do see that it was Wild Bill who killed the two girls, you kind of think back to the lines where he says about he tried to take it back, but it was too late. And obviously, we see him do that to Mr. Jingles.
Yeah.
But it's quite a juxtaposition, I think it is, to kind of how you see it at the start versus how you see it then.
Yeah, yeah. So we haven't introduced Mr. Jingles yet, though.
No,
you mentioned him. So the guards are taking their break at one point, and a mouse comes out of the restraint room, which is a padded cell, and he basically ventures into the middle of the corridor, and then one of the guards snaps off a bit of his cheese biscuit and throws it to him, and he picks it up and eats it, and they're impressed with firstly the sort of courage of this little mouse as he comes out, and soon realise that he's perhaps a little bit special. So they feed him a bit more, and then eventually, as the film goes on, Delacroix adopts him as a little pet, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And grows very fond of him, and of course, being a condemned man, anything that brings a bit of joy into his life at that sort of late stage of his life, is a good thing. But our character Percy, when the little mouse breaks free and runs out, Percy stamps on him.
Yeah, it's a. I think one of the good things about it is, so with his character, we don't get told what he did to be there, but obviously to get the death penalty, you have to have done something pretty horrific.
Yeah.
So Wild Bill's there for murdering 3 people. John Coffey's there for murdering the 2 girls, supposedly. So we can assume that it involved murder. And the whole fact that, when he goes to death row, not to death row, when he walks to the Green Mile, and he kind of says like, you're good people. I wish I'd met you somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's almost like having Mr. Jingles potentially like brought out the good in him.
Yeah.
And not really changed him, but kind of just brought something different to the surface.
Yeah. So Mr. Jingles has been stamped into the ground, and then John Coffey says, "Bring him over," and cups him in his hands and breathes on him, and you get a glow from the hands, and brings him back to life. But that didn't surprise Tom Hanks' character, because earlier in the film he'd already been subjected to the special powers that Coffey had.
Because he'd taken his, I think it was urinary infection.
He had a bladder infection early in the film, and at one point he said it's like passing razor blades, and obviously he couldn't sleep because of it, and relations at home with his wife were put on hold, and Coffey called him over a couple of times and said, I need to speak to you, and Tom Hanks' character said, well, I'm too busy at the moment, I've got better fish to fry, and then eventually went forward, and Coffey leaned out and put his hands on him,
I think,
and basically took away the infection.
I think what's good about the scene is that if you don't know what's coming, it's a strange one, because he just kind of grabs him and then grabs his crotch.
Yeah.
So it kind of comes across like it's a bit strange. Is there going to be like a sexual assault scene in this? And then, he just takes the kind of infection. And obviously it's a bit brighter than a sexual assault scene. But you can kind of imagine that things like that might happen. So at that point in the film, it could have gone either way, really.
Yeah. Yeah, you weren't sure whether perhaps the trust you'd built up in his character was about to be shattered completely. Well, he was going to attack.
I think the trust aspect comes in when he grabs Percy, and that whole thing happens, because then it's like it's so sudden that it throws you off.
Yeah.
So this this gentle giant just suddenly like lashes out and grabs this guy, and it's meant to catch you off guard.
Yeah.
And obviously you've got I think one of the best scenes when Percy's kind of just come out, he's putting his belt on, and he turns around and he kind of looks up, and it's just you kind of know something's coming, but it's quite a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And anyway, Percy, this is the objectionable prison guard. Through various acts that he's carried out, and things that he's said, and his whole general demeanour, really, all the other guards are cautious of him. I think they can't quite believe his character and what he's like, but apparently he's got connections because he's related to someone high up in the prison service.
Louisiana's first lady.
Yeah, yeah. So he's in there, and they're sort of thinking of ways that they could perhaps get rid of him. And they strike a bit of a deal where he wants to be out front during one of the executions, and he wants to be the person in charge. So Tom Hanks' character enters into a bit of an agreement with him, saying that there's another job that's available that apparently he'd applied for, and he's encouraging him to go for it. But Percy then says, "I would if you gave me a shot at being out front."
Yeah. So I think one of the mirror scenes in this is him in the same spot as Wild Bill when they first take him from the hospital.
Yeah.
However, I was just thinking about that then, like, it doesn't actually make any sense for Wild Bill to be in the mental hospital, because if he, the insane asylum, if he's meant to be on death row, surely he'd be kind of in a holding cell somewhere rather than just standing in a hospital.
I thought maybe they were going to assess him because he was in such a weird state when they got him, and maybe they didn't have papers that came along with him or anything explaining his. So they probably thought that it was for his welfare. It was better that he was assessed and kept there until they could assess him, and then they took him down, didn't they, to the Green Mile?
But obviously there's a good sense of irony in this, with how the whole time Percy is potentially going for this job at the mental hospital, and at the end he ends up obviously
in the mental hospital,
which it doesn't feel too on the nose, which is something that when things like this happen in films, when there's a kind of sense of irony, it can feel too kind of, we got you there, because it doesn't really add to the plot. Whereas I think this is because obviously John Coffey, he kind of says, I've punished them, referring to Wild Bill and Percy, but he hasn't killed Percy.
No.
So I think it's more so like having to kind of, I guess, face your own medicine, kind of.
Yeah.
So obviously, Wild Bill, a murderer, I guess, kind of deserves to be murdered. Is that the idea? And then this, Percy guy just deserves to have nothing, essentially.
Well, his misdemeanors build throughout the film, don't they? So it sort of came to a sort of a climax, really, where he was given the position out front to deal with the execution, and part of the process was they put a natural sponge, which was doused in water, on top of the prisoner's head.
Yeah.
And then the skull cap is put in place, and obviously the water is so that the electrical current makes a very good connection. And knowingly, he chose not to actually wet the sponge. So the sponge, in effect, was like an insulator, which basically created a massive sort of amount of heat to be generated. And instead of being electrocuted and finished off quickly and swiftly, the whole thing went on, and the people who were there to see the death taking place basically saw the man catch fire because of it. And all through this, Percy was enjoying the whole thing. And,
well, no, the whole point is that he's not enjoying it. It's kind of like because he looks away at one point.
Oh yeah.
And Tom Hanks grabs him and he's like, you watch. Which is.
So, what do you think would have been his motivation for doing that then? Just to see what would happen?
I think it's a kind of it is like a sadistic kind of thing, and it's a strange thing because it's like there could be the opportunity for remorse there, so maybe he realizes that he should have done it, but it's what happens after when he's kind of like, I didn't know that it had to be wet or anything.
Yeah.
And obviously he was there the last time they did it. He knows it had to be wet, so it's there's no use for the excuse there.
No.
And
he showed no remorse because I'm sure he made a comment about the guy deserved to die anyway.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
I think the only weird thing about that scene is when Tom Hanks, it's kind of just like it was an execution and the guy's dead, and it doesn't really make sense for him to defend Percy. Because obviously he wants Percy gone, and then he says that line, and it's like, if he hadn't said that, you can assume that he'd probably get kicked out anyway.
Maybe he was concerned that there might be a cover-up, or maybe he was storing it up for later, which they did actually have retribution on Percy's character, didn't they? So what happened then thereafter was the head prison guard's wife had developed a brain tumor, and so throughout a few scenes, he mentioned that she was going off to have an X-ray,
Yeah.
and then and Tom Hanks was obviously very concerned about this because they were friends, and their wives had been friends as well.
I think his actor, James Cromwell, is really quite incredible in some of his scenes. Especially kind of when he's saying, I don't know how to tell my wife that she's going to die.
Yeah.
It's like it's a motive. It's a motive in how it's written. It's incredibly well written, this film, but it all hinges on how it's delivered.
Yeah.
And that the delivery he gives is just it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So then they hatch a bit of a plan to take Coffee out of the cell and smuggle him away in the night, and take him out to the house and see if he can work his magic on the wife. And this is all without the knowledge of the head guard, isn't it? So
Yeah.
So he hears this vehicle pull up in the dark, and he's out there with his shotgun, sort of ready to defend his property, and then they quickly talk him into allowing Coffee to come in and see if he can offer any help, really.
Yeah, I think it's a very well played out movie in that it doesn't feel there's nothing that feels kind of redundant in it and out of place. Like
No.
he keeps he doesn't release the tumor when he kind of takes it from her, and then obviously puts it into Percy later. But you kind of you know what's coming.
Yeah.
You know something's going to happen with it, and it doesn't feel like, well, why would he do that? It's more of a that actually does make some sense here. If he can take away these things, then you'd assume he can be able to kind of pass them on.
Yeah.
So like the bladder infection and stuff like that he takes, and the strangely the entire death of the mouse, which
Well, he brings the mouse back to life, and of course that for Delacroix, that's some sort of something nice in his life at the end of his days, really. So that's a good thing. But with Percy's character, the guard, by this time, you haven't got a lot of patience left with him, and
no, it's
you sort of want him to get his just desserts, really.
he is he's kind of the antagonist, I'd say. There's this film doesn't really have an antagonist in the traditional sense. So obviously the protagonist is Paul, Tom Hanks' character.
Yeah.
Because he is the one we follow. So even though John is the one we kind of see, and it's his story that we're interested in, kind of learning about, he's not the protagonist because he doesn't kind of lead it. So, but antagonist-wise, Percy is probably the closest. But then when it comes towards the end of kind of having to kill John, it puts up in the air maybe it's kind of a higher power that's the antagonist here.
Yeah. But certainly by that point, you've given up on Percy's character, haven't you? You really feel that he deserves what he gets, really, and that rounds it off, really.
Well, it's one of those things like Percy. He gets kind of the brain tumor, and he's essentially gone. And then the film continues with John still going to the electric chair. So instead of having it the antagonist is gone, and now it's all back to normal, and it's all fine. It's more about the kind of the impact of kind of the choices that they've made.
Yeah.
And John, just doesn't want to be there anymore, essentially.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna jump kind of from that point, but not from that point. So when he holds Mr. Jingles and apparently like makes him older, like makes him kind of a bit more immortal, and then he obviously passes some of himself into Paul because he has to show him what Wild Bill did. The whole, how at the end, kind of Paul goes, "I'm 108, I think it is."
Yeah.
There's a line in there that doesn't make too much sense because he says about how he watched his kid, so his kid who's grown,
Yeah.
when he's in 1935, but you would have to assume that he's not kind of an adult yet, because they kind of the way they speak about him in the plot like scene is more so like they're out of school, they're out of college, so they're on their own already, they're on their kind of own life.
Yeah.
So he says that he saw his son die, which if his son like did just kind of live till I don't know 80s,
Yeah.
then he would have only died a couple of years ago. If he's 108,
Yeah.
and it's because it's 60, it's set in, I think the modern stuff is, I think, probably early 2000s,
Right.
because he says about seeing the turn of the century.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we assume he was born in the 1800s and then he dies in the 2000s, the whole kind of thing of his son being born,
Yeah, it was a bit of a
and dying,
curious one.
I think it's like,
But
I think if they said he's over 100,
yeah,
rather than 108,
yeah, yeah.
but obviously I might have
It
misheard
would stand
but
another watching really to look at that point, wouldn't it? Really?
Yeah.
But it's revealed where he's going from the nursing home. So when he goes down for breakfast and gets his 2 pieces of dry toast, and he takes his one of his friends, a lady who he confides in, and all is revealed then when he goes off up to a little shack, which is up in the woods, and in there they've got the cigar box, which has got Mr. Jingles, a rather aged looking Mr. Jingles, who still does his little circus tricks, pushing a cotton reel around and that sort of thing, but albeit much slower and in a much more sort of sedate way. But obviously, as you say, Coffee's power is within, and he's obviously quite an old mouse as well.
I think one of the things is that like the actor Dabs Greer, I'm not sure how old he was at the time, but he looks kind of late 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
So if you take it as Paul's body is about that age, then if he's 100 odd,
yeah,
he could have another kind of 20 odd years or so of life after the end of this movie.
Yeah.
And it's quite a depressing end.
But he sums it up that he's had good times, doesn't he? And and he mentions that he's seen the change of the millennium, and he's quite positive about some aspects of it, but there is a bit of a sort of sadness to it. Yeah.
But I think it's the optimism, or something, well, kind of optimism that he says it with. Like he's kind of unremorseful about it when he's kind of saying to her, I'm going to see you die. So it's
yeah.
It is one of those things.
The thing that stood out in the film for me was the casting of it. I thought every character was incredibly well cast in the part that they played. The fact that, albeit 3 hours, it didn't feel like there was any sort of wasted scenes or anything. The whole thing knitted together really well.
Yeah.
It kept you engaged. Very interesting film. Very well shot. Certainly Coffee's character, his facial expressions and his emotions came across, and you felt his pain and his angst, and some of the scenes in it were extremely well crafted.
Yeah.
Where right out of the blue, when Wild Bill sort of broke loose and started flailing and beating and punching and all that sort of thing, you didn't see it coming.
No, it's a very. Well, the thing is, they don't check if he's sedated. They just assume he is.
Yeah.
And obviously, because they just assume, you just assume too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see him looking like that, and you go, okay, then. They I think they say about he must be dosed up or something, but you don't think about it. So when it happens, they have the little look.
Yeah.
And something's coming, but it's not like a cheeky wink to the camera halfway through, and you're like, oh well, something's going to happen in a bit. It's instant kind of, he has the look, and then he's straight into the attack.
Yeah, and Paul, Tom Hanks's character, then says to one of the other guards, "Didn't you check that he hadn't been sedated?" And and he said, "Oh, I didn't. I just assumed." And he said, "Well, you won't make that mistake again."
Yeah.
And you knew he wouldn't, because it blew up pretty quickly, and it could have got worse if one of the other guards hadn't bashed him over the head with a baton. And all the while, Percy was sort of
Percy's
cowering in the corner.
I think that shows Percy is kind of at the end of the day he's a coward.
Yeah,
and that's really his character. It's like he's trying to get any piece of power that he can, and obviously being in front of being the guy out front is the maximum amount of power he can really have in this scenario.
In that situation, yeah. But he comes across as a thoroughly nasty, sadistic bully, just an objectionable character.
Yeah,
really. And he's got a bit of leverage over the other guards because of his family connections, and he uses that to the full. And so when he gets the attack by Coffee and pass the tumour to him, then you feel that he's got what he deserves, really.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, I'm going to kind of pose something. So, with John Coffey, where do you think he kind of came from? Because obviously, he has this magical power, and he seems very, very kind of self-assured that heaven and hell exist.
Yeah. Well, the his legal his solicitor said that he appeared during the time of the Depression, and lots of people, there was lots of sort of movement and toing and froing of workforce. People were looking for work. People were moving from state to state to find work. There was a pretty desperate situation. So he obviously washed up where he was, and that was the sort of the explanation for it, wasn't it, from that point of view?
Yeah. Well,
what did you think?
Well, I was just thinking that to chuck out a wild speculation that the character could be a kind of modern day Jesus.
Yeah.
Because obviously he comes in, helps people, and then ends up getting killed.
Yeah.
But other than obviously it's a film that does deal with biblical things.
It does, and
so it's I think there's probably something in there about connections to higher beings.
Yeah.
But then obviously it's Stephen King, so it could be connecting to something in another book he's done, or it could be some fantastical kind of alternate universe power. Just I think it's one of those things that just intrigues the viewer.
Well, intriguing, and the film as a whole, I would say, is excellent, excellent cinema, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well written, and it leaves you sort of at the end of the film feeling, quite satisfied that you've seen a really, really well produced and put together film. Leaves you with a few questions, but that's the excellent writing of Stephen King,
and
the excellent direction, and also casting and
adaptation
acting.
of Frank Darabont's writing. There's a few jokes in it that actually are funny. That works.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not like it feels like natural humor rather than forced, like kind of comedy. Because I think one of the things in movies is a lot of the time, a character will come out of a line that sounds like something deliberately funny, but it doesn't sound like something that someone would actually say.
Yeah.
Whereas this film, the lines people say sound like things people would say.
Yeah.
So, what would you give this out of 10?
I'd give it 9 out of 10.
What did you give? What did you give on Any Sunday?
I gave that 9 out of 10. I may even give it 10 out of 10.
Well, I'm going to give it 9.5 out of 10.
I'm going to give it 9.6 out of 10.
Well, I think that'll do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Go and watch the other episodes, subscribe or like it, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.